Everyone, good day to all of you. Hope you're all doing well. I wanted to talk today and really reevaluate my position on chest rigs compared to belt kit, and I'll also be talking a bit about plate carriers as well, but primarily this whole discussion is going to revolve around just some of my own thoughts that I've been having, which, big caveat is this is going to be purely set up for my own use case, but I feel like maybe some of the thought process that I went through will be beneficial to someone else out there. So lately, I have been revisiting my belt kit primacy, I guess you could say. I've been using a belt for my primary piece of gear for the past several years, pretty much exclusively. But recently I've been testing out and going back and trying chest rigs a lot more. For this discussion, I do want to preface that I do a lot of hunting and hiking in my gear. Now, I do a lot of just gun stuff out at the range as well, but when I am setting up my gear, I do primarily gear it towards sustainment, or maybe you'd even want to just say kind of like survival essentials. Just that way, when I'm out, even if I'm separated from my pack, it's not like I'm gonna run out of water or food. I'm good for at least a good portion of the day. Now, for the reason I was using a belt kit for the past several years, it was to fulfill two objectives. The first and biggest of those, it provided me a way to keep all of my commonly used items together. So what I mean by that is, for example, my IFAK or my knife, stuff like that, my butt pack and whatever other essentials I have in there. That way, I'd have my belt, and I could put that on underneath my plate carrier if I happened to be wearing a plate carrier that day, or if I wanted to plus up on just magazines, I could just throw on a chest rig over it, or I could just wear the belt standalone, which is what I did the vast majority of the time, but it just gave me that flexibility. The second objective, however, like I said already a little bit, was just to give me that short-term sustainment. That I'll talk about it. Both of these points somewhat shifted. I wouldn't say the objectives necessarily changed for what I set my gear up for, but just interesting stuff I've found. So the belt, it definitely did fulfill both of these objectives for me, and as you can probably guess just by how long I did use the belt kit, it worked quite well. And even at this point, even though I'm actually for myself probably going to switch to mostly using a chest rig, at least for the foreseeable future, until I notice some other thing that I want to change potentially, I'll probably be using a chest rig for now. But the biggest thing I noticed when I was using the belt kit, really where my biggest complaints started coming in, which even then weren't that big, I do want to emphasize that, but it was a lot to do with my pack, especially when I'm carrying a lot of gear. That prompted me to reevaluate my whole adherence to the philosophy of first, second, and third line gear as well for my own use case, which I won't go too far off on that rabbit hole right now. It doesn't matter too much. But moving on from there, the problem I was running into is, although my belt's waist belt normally does actually clear my belt kit because I wear my belt a little bit lower, so it usually works fine if I'm going on flat terrain or even uphill. It's actually not a problem. But what I notice is actually when I'm doing certain types of movement, so for example, if I'm going over obstacles, granted that's short term, easy to do, but actually one other thing I noticed is, especially when I'm hiking downhill a lot, the pack actually had a tendency to want to push into the rear of my belt kit just because of how my hips are shifting, just from that sort of movement, which actually caused a compound problem. First off, it would put a lot of uneven pressure on the side and back of my hips and would cause a little bit of discomfort for sure. Again, not terrible, but pretty much enough to be annoying. And also as a result of this pressure, it would push my actual belt line and thus my pants. It would push them down quite a bit. So after a while, if I didn't adjust my pants hiking downhill, I'd be sagging like it's the 2000s. And I'm a G-Unit fan. So that was not great. Of course, it's not very comfortable to try to move like that either, and pretty much impossible to move quickly if you're sagging too much like that. Because of this, and counter to the idea that I've usually heard tossed around, and I agree with it for the most part as well, usually you want most of your weight to be on your hips, but I think that in the case of your primary gear item, right, the belt kit like I was saying, and now the chest rig that I'm using, I wanted that to be actually off of my hips. That way I could take the heavier piece of gear, being my pack, and then using the waist belt on there and having it nice and optimal where it should be, and of course then it's not pushing into anything around my belt line now that I'm using a chest rig. So that was really the big thing. Like I said, it wasn't terrible. I never had like permanent or long-term pain days later. It was always fine shortly after I'd stop and take a little break, but This, the uneven pressure, just those little annoyances with how the belt kit was interacting with my waist belt on my pack, it was just enough to put that little seed of an idea in the back of my mind to think about if there's a better approach to this, which is why I originally arrived at revisiting chest rigs. Now, I do say revisiting just as a little fun side note, back when I very, very first got into shooting, and actually, even at the start of this channel for a short period of time there was a bit of overlap where way back in the day, my very first piece of gear was actually an M81 LBV, and I used that for years when I was first starting out, and really good piece of kit there. Only reason I stopped using it was just because I got into AKs a ton, and the pouches on that were way too small to fit them properly. And actually even PMags, it's kind of a tight fit, at least with the one I had. I feel like it's not too bad of an idea to just pick up some pre-configured LBE. It's a good way to get a feel for the basics and just have a basic setup, and as you feel things out, and if you have annoyances with it or things just aren't working for you, then from there you can really build out exactly what you're looking for with some of that basic knowledge in place beforehand. At least that's what I found from my own experience. But moving on from that, beyond that LBV, and from the vests and sort of the chest rigs like that I used at the start of this channel, much more recently I did actually experiment a little bit with using a Linderhof chest rig, which I did a review a while ago on this channel, and it's actually, I don't use it that often. It's not even because it's a bad chest rig or anything. The problem I have with that chest rig and with a lot of this, the run-of-the-mill chest rigs, is that I pretty much need a split front because I do a decent amount of shooting for group and precision where I'm prone, shooting off of a mat or just off of the dirt. So having a split front, preferably either Fastex or first pierce tubes, I really hate zipped closures, just because if you have a lot of weight on the front of your chest rig, for example, just simple magazine pouches, then that zipper usually likes to bow outwards when you're trying to zip it, which is very annoying and also very difficult, especially if you're trying to put it back on in a hurry after getting back up from prone. First spear tubes are the best, in my opinion, for this. But yeah, Fastex are a pretty close second. I just prefer tubes simply because there's just a little bit less of a pinch point there. Moving on from that, I actually wanted to circle back around. If you recall at the start of the video, I mentioned I had two primary objectives that I was setting up my gear around. And you might be thinking, how does this chest rig actually fulfill that whole common use gear platform? Having all the common stuff that I use, the shared stuff on one platform. And actually, this chest rig does not. I don't feel like it's actually as important as I originally thought. Now, I should also mention one caveat is I know that an option with chest rigs, if you want to use it as a shared platform, is there is always the always the possibility of using it on top of a slick plate carrier, for instance. And I actually did try that again years ago, and I think I actually was still using it around the time I did first start the channel. If you want to go back, I think I had a few videos where I was using it just when talking about doing other stuff, and it works. It definitely does work, but I don't feel like it works very well. It gets quite hot, as in literally temperature hot, because you have so many layers on, but it also does create quite a few hot spots, pressure points, where things are just overly tight because you have all the straps of the chest rig and all the straps of the plate carrier. It's just not ideal. Again, it can be done if you absolutely have to, but I usually prefer not to, hence why I now just use a standalone plate carrier. And really the whole thing I was talking about with having that shared platform, again, I think that really stemmed from speculating about what kind of gear I might need in a SHTF scenario, where I might need to wear a plate carrier, and then I was trying to put everything I might need onto either my belt or my plate carrier again. So I feel like this will be a bit easier to understand if I do walk through my whole line of logic here. So going back just a little bit, I can one more time, I'm not trying to bore you or waste time, but I just feel like this will get the point across better. So my base premise, like I said, have a belt set up for short-term sustainment and have all the common gear that I would always need no matter what else I'm carrying. But even if a crazy enough SHTF event were to occur where I need to abandon absolutely everything and bug out to the woods, which in and of itself is already a bit far-fetched, and I know that people go back and forth all day on this and wargame it. The problem really is there's no right or wrong answer on, if you want to bug in or bug out, then you do you. The whole thing's speculative anyway, so It's really going to depend on how your area is and what you think you might need to do, but at the end of the day, no one's seen it for sure here in the US, so who's to say? Would also depend on situation. But not going to go too far off on that rabbit hole either. I'm already getting on a bit of a side tangent. I've got to catch myself. But, you know, if that were the case where I had to bug out, then at least for me, I would not be wearing the plate carrier out there. Probably at all. And if I am, it's going to be very little of the time. And I'll get into why that is in a sec. Again, try not to go off on too much of a side tangent. But as a result of that, that pretty much nullifies the base premise, right? Because then if I'm not wearing the plate carrier out there, I don't need to put all my stuff onto my belt. And similarly, the inverse doesn't make sense if you follow the same line of logic. So if SHTF, again, if that event happens, and if I'm bugging in instead, then I'd probably be wearing the plate carrier, have like more of a static defense type of setup, in which case I don't need sustainment pretty much on me whatsoever, because I'd have all my stuff in the house. So it's really not an issue. So for me, this is really... I don't know if I'd necessarily say it's like a competition between chest rigs versus belt kit, even though I might name the video something like this, because I'm not totally sure what I'll name it yet. But for me, this is more so a break from trying to make all of my gear work with the plate carrier, right? So let me get back into that whole side tangent. Now I can actually talk about it from earlier. I'm not actually... I'm not anti-armor. Like I said, I own a standalone plate carrier, and I think there are viable places for it to be used. But, well, I mean, the big thing for me is I'm just being realistic for my own use case, my whole situation. I'm not physically healthy enough anymore to hike for miles in the mountains with a plate carrier and ballistic helmet on. And even if I were, I feel like I'd probably want to pack the same amount of weight that the plates in the helmet would wear in food and water. Something just interesting that I've been reading about lately while I'm on the topic is always be mindful of your total carrying weight, and also how that weight is being distributed is extremely important. A few pounds on your head, on your shoulders from like a helmet or a night vision setup is going to be way different than if you're carrying it on your back or somewhere else on your person. Over encumbrance actually can and will permanently damage your spine and neck discs. There's all sorts of warm-up you can do to mitigate the effects. I've heard a lot of people talk about it for your knees and your hips and everything, but you really can't do anything to fix the issue with your whole spine. And I speculate that might actually be part of the reason why I can no longer do the whole walking or hiking in miles with the whole body armor setup myself, because I did some pretty intense stuff like that a few years ago. And I really messed up my neck as a result. Or at least I think that. I mean, maybe it's something else that caused the issue, but that probably didn't help. And this isn't to say that, if you just wear a plate carrier, that's not going to cause you permanent issues. I was going out with, back in the day, with AR-500 plates and a really heavy Chinese helmet. And, my backpack was loaded down with a lot, and it also didn't have a proper suspension system of its own, so it was not sitting well on my body. So this is all to say that if you start stacking all that sustainment gear with plates and everything, which is also going to affect how a pack can sit, it's not going to be good even with the best pack in the world sitting over a plate carrier. It's going to cause damage at some point if you're carrying too much. I'll link a few papers. Like I said, I have been reading a lot about this recently, so I'd really recommend you skim over these papers. They're a really, really good read. At least read the abstract or the conclusion if you want. So 2 of them are from the National Library of Medicine, and one of them is actually from Fashion and Textiles Journal, of all things, which sounds weird. But they're all focusing on weight and strain. The one from Fashion and Textiles I find particularly interesting for night vision, just because it really focuses on the load that's placed on your neck wearing different types of helmets and night vision setups, which is really interesting, I find. And these are all written for a military audience, but it still, I would say, applies pretty much 100%. I guess one of the articles, not really, because it's more so about air aviation and pilots, but still, very interesting stuff that can still be applied, because a lot of this is the same or similar gear. With all those tangents out of the way, finally, to bring it back to my main point. So that, for me, with all that in consideration, it made sense to me to drop the whole insistence on a shared use platform. So how I set my new chest rig up, and I'm not going to go into some gear breakdown. There's way too many videos like that here on GunTube, and I guess if anyone wants to see it, I can talk through why I set things up the way I did, but this video is going to be a meta-analysis, really. I'm not going to delve into every single little pouch, because it doesn't really matter. But what I did, I really set mine up for hunting. I know what I need for hunting, and going out there, I have, you'll probably notice, I don't have a whole lot of magazine pouches. If this was set up more for actual SHTF, I mean, it's not hard. I can just move pouches around and put other magazine pouches on here. Really, the reason I have it set up the way I do is just so I can use shotguns for bird hunting, use my MR762. I have that one magazine pouch you can see there on the front. It fits those 417 mags. But really, I set this chest rig up to be just a nice practical hunting rig for stuff that I'll immediately use, and there's pretty much no speculation as far as like a what if. Like, what if I need grenades? What if I need extra mags? And I mean, if there was an actual SHTF scenario, then yeah, like I said, I probably would switch out like one of these GP pouches that I use for shot shells at the moment, just switch out for a proper magazine pouch, stuff like that. But I feel like it's a nice rig, you know. Pretty nice to have something that's just exactly set up for something I can use immediately. And it's been really comfortable. I've had this for, I think, about a month now, because I haven't really been making videos, just been using this a lot, getting out with it. It's been comfortable. So thank you all for watching, and hopefully this video gives just some additional insight, perspective maybe, into setting up or buying gear, whatever, for yourself. Like I said, this is really just my own thoughts after doing it for my own use case, so none of this is gospel, but maybe just some of the ideas and things I ran into will help one of you out there. And yeah, go read those articles. Those are far better than this video ever will be.